On August 18th, 15-year-old Tim Scumfield and his twin brother Tom set off on an adventure they'd planned for weeks. Growing up in Arkansas, the twins were no strangers to the outdoors. They'd spent their childhood exploring forests, lakes, and hills near their home. This time, they were heading for Devil's Den Cave, a popular Arkansas cave system known for its treacherous terrain and spelunking challenges. The hike to the entrance led them through thick forest. Insects buzzed around them, and the ground grew rough with stone. They passed the edges of clear lakes before finally reaching their goal, a dark opening in the hillside. Cool air drifted out from the cave's mouth, and without hesitation, the brothers stepped into the shadows of Devil's Den State Park. Devil's Den Cave was known for tight passages and deep drops, but to Tim and Tom, that was part of the fun. With headlamps lighting the way, they moved deeper underground. The Arkansas cave was both eerie and beautiful, smooth rock shaped by water, walls glittering with mineral deposits, and silence broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing through the narrow tunnels. The air grew colder as they moved deeper, but it was a narrow crack in the rock on the right that caught Tim's eye. Just 9 inches wide, it barely looks passable. Tom hesitated, suggesting they stay in safer areas, but Tim was already intrigued. He was always the bolder twin, drawn to risk and discovery in extreme cave exploration. Without waiting, Tim began squeezing into the crevice. It stretched 20 feet long, 15 feet high, and only 9 inches wide. The walls pressed tightly against him as he twisted and wriggled his way down. Then, without warning, his foot hit a weak patch of rock. It slipped. His left leg jammed instantly between 2 sharp walls. His right leg, already unsteady, slid off the slick surface, pulling his body into an awkward stretch. He was trapped, bent painfully, his lower body wedged and immobile. Panic set in fast. He shouted for Tom, voice echoing through the stone. His left leg was stuck tight, and his right leg had no grip. The rock had him pinned in this Devil's Den cave rescue nightmare. Pain shot through Tim's trapped leg, radiating up his knee and ankle. The pressure was unbearable. He couldn't shift, couldn't move. One side of his body stretched painfully, the other crushed tight against stone. It felt like his body was tearing apart.
Tom heard his screams and ran to the crevice. He crouched at the top, desperate to help, but the gap was too narrow. Tim was wedged deep, his leg completely stuck. Tom couldn't reach him, couldn't pull him out. He had no choice. He ran. Tom sprinted through the forest, heart racing, until he reached the park's visitor center around 5:30 p.m. He burst through the doors and told the rangers what had happened. Jeremy Bruce and Tim Scott, both seasoned park rangers in Arkansas, grabbed their rescue gear without hesitation. They followed Tom back toward the cave, moving fast as the sun dropped low, casting long shadows across the trail. When they reached the entrance, cool air poured out from the cave. Bruce and Scott paused only briefly before heading in, bracing themselves for what lay ahead in the tight, pitch-black tunnels of Devil's Den. When the rangers reached the crevice, they were shocked at how deep Tim was. The crack was so tight they could barely see him. His voice echoed faintly, strained with pain. It was clear this wasn't going to be a simple rescue. Tim's foot was wedged tight, and any wrong move could make the injury worse or push him even deeper into the rock. They had to act fast. The rangers pulled out tubular webbing and tossed one end down to Tim, telling him to wrap it around his torso. Despite the pain, Tim managed to secure the strap around his body. Bruce and Scott tried pulling him up, but the space was too narrow and Tim's body was twisted at an impossible angle. He screamed as the pressure on his leg intensified. Realizing they couldn't free him on their own, Bruce called for backup. By 7:50 p.m., cave rescuers in Arkansas arrived and quickly assessed the situation. Pulling Tim sideways wasn't an option. The only way out was straight up, and it had to be done carefully. One wrong move could make things worse. Using webbing, they formed a secure loop. Ranger Bruce climbed onto a ledge directly above the crevice, lowering the loop to Tim and guiding him to slip it under his arms and around his chest. Tim, drained and in pain, followed every instruction. Inch by inch, the team began to lift him. Each pull sent sharp pain through his leg, but he stayed focused. This was his only shot. Slowly, his foot began to come free. Bit by bit, the grip of the rock gave way. Finally, he was close enough for Ranger Scott to reach him. With one last pull, they hauled him out of the crevice. At 8:20 p.m., Tim was free. His legs were bruised and swollen, but somehow he had escaped without serious injury.
This next story is about a deep underwater misadventure that turned into a horrific nightmare.
It was February 2007, deep in the woodlands of North Florida. Among the clear springs scattered across the landscape was Allen Mill Pond Spring, calm on the surface but hiding a vast underwater cave system below. For Ron Simmons, 53, this wasn't just another spring. He was a seasoned cave diver and underwater cartographer, with a sharp eye for detail and a passion for mapping Florida's hidden depths. By Valentine's Day, Ron had completed 43 dives in the spring, logging over 2,500 feet of surveyed passages. Each dive added more detail to the map he was building. For Ron, it wasn't just exploration, it was documentation, capturing a world that most would never enter. Allen Mill Pond Spring is no easy dive. Even veteran cave divers face serious risks here. The tunnels are packed with fine silt, and the smallest movement can cloud the water instantly, dropping visibility to zero. Two winding conduits form a tangled three-dimensional maze underground. While the deepest point hits 46 feet, most of the system stays around 30 feet deep. Navigating such tight, complex spaces required more than skill, it demanded the right gear. Traditional back-mounted tanks wouldn't fit through the narrowest parts. Ron used side-mounted tanks instead, slung along his sides to help him slide through tight spots while still carrying backup air.
Roughly 200 feet in, Ron reached a familiar T intersection he had already mapped. According to his plan, he took the left tunnel, a section he hadn't fully explored yet. The passage narrowed quickly. He shifted his body to move through the tight space, careful not to stir the silt below. Beyond a tight restriction, the tunnel widened into a chamber with several narrow offshoots. Ron paused here and began his survey work, methodically measuring distances using a calibrated guideline, recording depths with his pressure gauge, and sketching passage dimensions onto his underwater slate. Step by step, he advanced deeper into the unexplored area, documenting every turn. After nearly 3 hours underwater, Ron had logged 238 feet, 72.5 meters, of new survey data, an impressive feat in a cave known for its difficulty. Still within the system's normal range. But around 300 feet, 91.4 meters from the entrance, something went wrong. When he checked his pressure gauges, a troubling reading stared back. His primary tank was draining much faster than it should have. It could have been a slow leak or the result of extra effort squeezing through narrow spots. Regardless of the reason, the numbers didn't lie. He no longer had enough air to guarantee a safe return. Ron quickly switched to his secondary tank, but the reading was no better. It held less air than anticipated. Now both tanks were running critically low, and he was still hundreds of feet from the exit. With no dive buddy to assist and no backup reserves stashed in the system, Ron was staring down every cave diver's worst fear, running out of air deep inside a twisting underwater maze. When Ron failed to return at his scheduled time, worry set in. Fellow cave diver Wes Skiles alerted local authorities, asking them to check for Ron's car at the main spring entrance, but the vehicle wasn't there. The next day, the search expanded. Wes and renowned diver Jill Heinerth discovered Ron's vehicle parked near a less conspicuous spring vent hidden deep in the woods. The Lafayette County Sheriff's Office was called immediately. Within 30 minutes, rescue and recovery teams began arriving. The quiet spring had become a flurry of urgent activity. Gear clanked, tanks hissed, and divers prepared for what everyone hoped was still a rescue. At 3:55 p.m. on February 15th, Mark Long entered the water for a reconnaissance dive. Moving with practiced precision, he swam 650 feet, 198 meters, into the underwater cave system. The water, crystal clear in most places, but occasionally clouded by the disturbance of his passage, offered no sign of Ron. After nearly 3 hours of methodical searching, Mark surfaced empty-handed. The team huddled to reassess. A close review of Ron's partially completed map and field notes offered a crucial realization. Mark had ventured into the wrong tunnel. The labyrinthine structure of Allen Mill Pond Spring meant that understanding Ron's mindset, his plan, his curiosity, was essential to finding him. At 5:06 p.m., armed with this new insight, Mark began a second dive. This time, he followed the route Ron had likely taken, stringing a guideline behind him for other divers to follow if needed. At 5:48 p.m., just 42 minutes later, Mark surfaced again, but this time, he wasn't alone. He brought back Ron's lifeless body. Ron had completed 43 successful dives in that very cave. No one could have imagined the 44th would be his last. The recovery of Ron's body revealed a series of haunting details about his final dive. He was found roughly 300 feet, 91.4 meters from the entrance, suspended in the water as if still swimming. One regulator was clenched in his mouth, the backup trailing behind, textbook redundancy for a diver of his caliber. Both tanks were completely empty. Data retrieved from his dive computer confirmed that Ron had never descended deeper than 28 feet, 8.5 meters during this exploration. But depth wasn't the danger here. The real threat was time. In one of the most sobering discoveries, his waterproof survey notes showed that Ron had mapped 238 feet, 72.5 meters of new cave passage on this very dive. Even as his situation grew more desperate, he never abandoned the meticulous work that had defined his legacy in the cave diving community. When his air began to run low, Ron didn't panic. His body position indicated calm, controlled movement, evidence that he was trying to conserve every last breath while making his way toward the exit.
But as he approached the 300-foot mark from safety, his second tank neared exhaustion. Still in a streamlined swimming position, Ron kept moving with quiet determination, inching toward the surface. Yet the distance was too great, and the remaining air simply wasn't enough. Ron's final moments were spent in motion, focused, steady, and intent on survival. He never gave in to panic, but the last of his breathable gas slipped away inside the darkness. Florida's underwater caves are as mesmerizing as they are merciless. Even with world-class training, redundant gear, and years of experience, cave diving leaves no margin for error. Running out of air in a submerged labyrinth is every diver's worst nightmare, one that this time could not be outrun.
The morning of October 2nd, 2020, was filled with excitement and anticipation. 4 young cavers, Mark, Tom, James, and Nathan, gathered at the entrance of the obscure Silverstone Cave, nestled deep in the rugged hills of the Appalachian Mountains. Their goal was simple: to explore the cave's intricate network of passages, test their limits, and add another thrilling adventure to their belts. Mark, the most experienced of the group, was the one to lead the way. At 24, his knowledge of caves and their dangers was unparalleled, which made him the natural leader. Tom, James, and Nathan, all in their early 20s, had been looking forward to this trip for months. But today's exploration would turn into a nightmare none of them had anticipated. The cave system had long been a subject of local folklore, with rumors of an uncharted passage that led deep into the heart of the mountain. The group had mapped out their route for the day, carefully studying the maps and preparing for tight crawlways and narrow squeezes. The cave stretched for miles, and as they ventured deeper, the walls began to close in on them. They crawled, squeezed, and twisted their bodies through passageways, feeling both the thrill and the fear that came with being in such a confined, dark place. After navigating through several tight crawlways, they reached a particularly narrow section of the cave. Mark, being the lead caver, moved ahead to inspect the next passage. As he advanced, he realized the space was too tight even for him to squeeze through easily. Tom, who wasn't as tall or broad-shouldered as Mark, suggested he should give it a try. He was smaller in stature and felt confident he could make it through. He pushed himself forward into the passage, his body contorting as he slid through the small opening. On the other side, Tom quickly realized the path ahead ended abruptly, a dead end. But unaware of this, he called back to Mark, James, and Nathan to join him. "There's nothing here," he said, unsure of what to do next. But Mark, stubborn and eager to keep exploring, refused to believe that they had reached the dead end so soon. After a brief discussion, Mark decided to try the tight passage himself.
James and Nathan were watching from behind, as Mark, determined to push past the obstacle, began to squeeze his body into the narrow gap. It wasn't long before the situation took a turn for the worse. As Mark pressed forward, a loose rock shifted under his weight, blocking his progress completely. His body was wedged tight between the jagged walls, unable to move in any direction. "Mark, are you okay?" Nathan called out from behind, his voice filled with concern. Mark's voice came back strained. "I'm stuck. I can't move. The rocks have shifted and locked me in." Panic set in. Tom, who was on the other side of the narrow passage, tried to pull him free, but the tightness of the space made any attempt to help impossible. Meanwhile, James and Nathan, who were now trapped on the left side of the passage, could only watch helplessly as the situation grew more desperate. Then, without warning, the cave began to rumble slightly, a low, ominous sound that echoed through the narrow chambers. At first, they thought it was just an aftershock from the unstable rock around them, but the noise quickly grew louder. It was then that they realized something far more dangerous was happening. Rain had begun to fall outside, and water was quickly flowing into the cave system. Nathan and James looked at each other in horror as they heard the rush of water approaching them from the left side. The cave, which had always been a dry and safe environment, was now filling with water faster than they could comprehend. "Nathan, we need to move, now," James shouted, grabbing Nathan by the arm and pulling him toward the exit, but it was already too late. The water quickly surged into the left chamber, swallowing everything in its path. The force of the floodwaters was too much. Within minutes, the cave's passageways began to flood, and both James and Nathan were overwhelmed by the rushing waters. The water rose quickly, filling the space they had just been standing in. James and Nathan, unable to escape in time, were swept away, trapped in the flooding chamber, struggling against the current. Their screams were drowned by the roar of the water as it overtook them.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the narrow passage, Mark was still stuck. He was completely immobilized, his body wedged so tightly that the water had no way to reach the chamber where Tom was. The narrow passage had blocked off the water's flow, creating a barrier that trapped Mark but spared Tom, who was still alive on the other side. Tom shouted desperately, his voice echoing through the tight space. "Mark, can you hear me? We have to get you out. Help is on the way." But Mark couldn't respond. His body was pressed so tightly against the rocks that even breathing became difficult. As the water continued to rise on the other side, he could hear the faint splashes of the rushing flood, but it was too late for the others. The floodwaters had already sealed their fate. After what seemed like an eternity, rescue workers finally arrived, navigating the flooded passages with their equipment. They had no idea what had happened, only that Mark had been reported stuck and the cave had flooded. When they reached the narrow passage, they found Mark still trapped, alive but barely conscious. Using specialized tools, they carefully removed the loose rocks that had wedged Mark in place, pulling him to safety. As he was finally freed, Mark was exhausted, bruised, and traumatized by the loss of his friends. Tom, who had managed to survive due to the location of the passage, was pulled to safety, but James and Nathan were never found. The floodwaters had claimed them both, leaving their fate a mystery to be uncovered only by the passing of time. The Silverstone Cave would remain a place of silent mourning, a reminder of the unpredictable dangers lurking in the dark. Mark, now alone, had to live with the haunting memory of the cave that took his friends and the treacherous passage that had left him trapped in its grasp. The cave, once a source of adventure and excitement, had turned into a tomb, claiming lives in the blink of an eye.
In the next story, a 14-year-old faces a life-or-death struggle, trapped in a claustrophobic space, with his body temperature dropping dangerously low.
February 27, 2004. On a cold winter morning in Kentucky, a group of eager scouts gathered for a caving trip at Sweet Potato Cave. Among them was 14-year-old Jesse Gott. Sweet Potato Cave lies in a rugged part of Kentucky, surrounded by rolling hills and dense woodlands. The cave is part of an ancient limestone network carved over thousands of years by underground streams. Its entrance is small and hidden among the trees, easy to miss if you don't know where to look. Inside, the passages twist sharply, with tight crevices and sudden drops that challenge even seasoned explorers. The scouts, already familiar with the entrance, prepared carefully for their expedition. Equipped with helmets and headlamps, they stepped into the cave, their lights cutting through the darkness as they moved deeper into the winding passages. All seemed fine until the group reached a narrow crevice that caught Jesse's attention. It looked like a tight squeeze, but curiosity pushed him forward. Ignoring cautious warnings, he slid into the gap, eager to see what lay beyond. The excitement vanished instantly when he realized he was stuck, wedged tight up to his chest with no room to move. The rock gripped him like a vice. For the first time, Jesse experienced the terrifying helplessness of being completely trapped. He struggled desperately, but his body refused to budge even a fraction. Panic surged as stories of other cavers getting stuck flooded his mind. He'd always thought such things happened to other people, never to him. But now, deep underground, that illusion shattered. Andrew Duncan, one of the scout leaders, quickly assessed the situation. He saw the fear in Jesse's eyes, his breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. Jesse had crawled into the tight gap and was now hopelessly stuck. Andrew explained the situation to the other scouts, their earlier excitement replaced by a heavy silence. One by one, they gathered around Jesse, offering quiet words of encouragement, but the tension was unmistakable. Jesse could hear their hushed conversations behind him, and with every passing minute, his fear deepened. His chest felt tighter, not just from the crushing rock, but from the growing panic. The cold numbed his fingers, making them twitch uncontrollably. A creeping chill settled into his body, and each breath became a battle. Surrounded by friends, Jesse still felt alone, as if the darkness had cut him off from the rest of the world. No one realized it at first, but Jesse's body temperature was dropping fast. Hypothermia was setting in, making his situation even worse. His friends were caught between fear and helplessness as they watched him struggle. At first, they tried to comfort him with calm words, but as the minutes dragged on and Jesse remained wedged in place, their anxiety mounted. Some attempted to pull him free, but the tight crevice left them with no leverage, forcing them to back off in frustration. "We tried to get him out, but he was just squeezed," Andrew later recalled. While Andrew and 4 scouts stayed with Jesse to keep him calm, the others sprinted toward the cave entrance to get help. Time seemed frozen as Jesse remained trapped. The call for assistance quickly reached local firefighters and the rescue squad. Within minutes, a specialized team arrived at the scene equipped with tools and determination to free the young scout. The urgency was overwhelming as rescuers planned their next move. Every passing minute counted. Once inside the cave, they reached the narrow crevice where Jesse was trapped and quickly realized he needed immediate care, not just for his position, but for hypothermia as well. They wrapped him in blankets and placed heating pads around his body before getting to work. Carefully assessing the constriction, they used shovels and crowbars to widen the opening. Jesse focused on his breathing, fighting to stay calm as fear threatened to take over. He could hear the muffled commands of the rescuers and feel their determination. Meanwhile, Andrew and the other scouts stayed close, offering constant reassurance. "You're going to be okay, Jesse. Just hang in there," they whispered, trying to keep his spirits alive. After hours of relentless effort, the rescuers finally made a breakthrough. The crevice was widened just enough for Jesse to be pulled free. With a coordinated effort, they carefully maneuvered him out around 3 p.m. The cave echoed with cheers and sighs of relief. Jesse was finally out, but his ordeal wasn't over. He was immediately taken to a local hospital where a medical team was already on standby. They quickly examined him and confirmed he had only mild hypothermia, a relief given the terrifying situation. After being warmed and monitored, Jesse was released shortly after, safe and recovering.
August 4th, 2006. Emily Bacon joined her Girl Scout troop on a trip to Glade Cave, Virginia. It was meant to be the highlight of their week-long camp. The group was briefed, geared up, and under supervision. Everything was by the book, but caves don't care about plans. The entrance to Glade Cave was a narrow gap in the hillside, nothing alarming. Inside, the passage narrowed quickly, forcing the group to crawl on their bellies. Emily was somewhere in the middle, carefully following the slope downward. She soon reached a point where 2 large boulders were wedged into the tunnel, creating a tight obstacle. The slope turned slightly uphill here, making the footing unstable. A counselor ahead was guiding the group, while others offered support from behind. As Emily slid past the top boulder, she brushed against it. The stone shifted. It was subtle, a soft scrape, but it sent a chill through her. She froze, heart racing, unsure of what just happened. Then, cautiously, she kept moving forward. That's when it happened. Without warning, the upper boulder lurched, slamming down hard. The lower one shifted with it, crushing shut the narrow gap she'd just crawled into. The impact was violent, jarring her entire body. A sharp edge tore into her side, pinning her instantly. Her chin slammed between the lower rock and the ceiling, locking her head in place. She couldn't move. She was trapped, and she knew it. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. Then came the pain, hot, sharp, and relentless, ripping through her right side like a blade. Every breath felt like a knife digging deeper into her ribs. She tried to shift, even slightly, but the rocks were unyielding. What had been a crawl space seconds ago had become a stone coffin. The troop's counselors immediately realized something was wrong. One rushed back and found Emily wedged between the boulders, her body twisted and crushed by the weight. Her right arm was pinned, her torso compressed, her head jammed against the ceiling. Only her legs remained free, but the angle of the cave made them useless. There was no way she could push herself out. She was stuck, and time was not on her side.
The group tried everything to free her, but each attempt to shift the boulders only seemed to make things worse. The rocks were precarious, and any wrong move could make them collapse further. Realizing the severity of the situation, one counselor turned back immediately, crawling through the tight tunnels to get help. The others stayed behind with Emily, wrapping her in blankets and doing their best to keep her calm. They spoke to her constantly, their voices steady but strained, trying to reassure her that help was on the way. But the pain was relentless. Emily's breathing grew shallow, labored by the crushing pressure against her side. Every inhale felt like fire in her chest, and the cold stone beneath her offered no comfort. She couldn't move, couldn't shift, couldn't even lift her head. The weight of the boulders was unyielding. Rescue teams arrived as quickly as possible, including the Mount Solon Volunteer Rescue Squad, bringing specialized equipment designed for cave emergencies. But even with their tools, the situation was daunting. The passage leading to Emily had been narrow to begin with, but now, with the rocks wedged into place, it was a nearly impassable choke point. The rescuers advanced slowly, methodically, navigating the tight crawl space with extreme caution. Their first priority? Stabilize the boulders. Any additional movement could be fatal. Using inflatable air bladders, they carefully created just enough space to work without shifting the heavy stones. Only when the area was secure did they begin the painstaking task of chiseling away at the upper boulder. One rescuer at a time took turns, each strike of metal against rock ringing through the cave like a hammer on bone. It was a race against time, but one that had to be run with extreme care. Every second mattered, yet every movement had to be calculated. Emily's life depended on it. Emily's condition was deteriorating. The pressure on her side was cutting off circulation, and the awkward angle of her body was putting strain on her neck and back. She was in excruciating pain. One rescuer likened her position to being wedged inside a stone coffin, unable to move, barely able to breathe. This harrowing cave rescue mission highlighted the risks of spelunking accidents and the difficulty of underground emergency response.
After hours of chiseling, the upper boulder was finally broken into smaller, more manageable pieces. The team used hooks and ropes to move the fragments out of the way. Each piece removed brought a small measure of relief, but the lower boulder still pinned Emily's head, its sharp edge cutting into her flesh. The rescue team, trained for confined space extraction during caving disasters, worked with extreme caution to avoid a collapse. With the upper boulder gone, the team began digging around the lower rock, using hand tools to chip away at the packed dirt and stone. The process was painstaking, and every movement had to be precise. Too much force could destabilize the remaining rock, but too little would mean leaving Emily trapped. Such cave entrapment scenarios are often used in caver safety training to emphasize the importance of preparation and teamwork during emergencies. Finally, after more than 2 hours of grueling effort, the lower boulder was freed enough to be moved. The boulder wedged back to its original position, releasing Emily's head from its grip. She was finally free. The rescuers carefully pulled her out of the passage and secured her in a stretcher, ensuring her spine was supported as they prepared to move her. Her right side was a mess, deep purple bruises already forming. Her chin was scraped red raw where it had been wedged between the unforgiving rocks. Worse, her right arm hung limp. She had lost all feeling in it.
The tight confines of the cave made every step a challenge, but the team was relentless, navigating the jagged and narrow passage with an almost superhuman focus. When Emily finally emerged into the open air, it was as though she had surfaced from a nightmare. The harsh brightness of daylight felt almost surreal after the oppressive darkness.
This next story reveals just how quickly nature can change, turning calm conditions into chaos within only a few hours. February 22nd, 1975, Bloomington, Indiana. Rain had hammered the region for days, flooding streams and saturating the ground. But despite the worsening storm, 3 university freshmen, Kim Aldrich, Marcia Bott, and Terry Yoakum, decided to explore a salamander cave. Aldrich had some caving experience. For Bott and Yoakum, it was their first real trip underground. They entered just after 1 p.m., unaware of how dangerous the conditions had become. Salamander Cave was known for being easy to access, making it a popular spot for beginners. But the same traits that made it inviting also made it risky in storms. The normally calm stream inside had turned into a violent surge. The 3 entered with minimal gear: carbide lamps for Aldrich and Yoakum, a flashlight for Bott. No ropes, no waterproof clothing, no plan for flooding. Inside, they crossed paths with John Abney, a seasoned caver. He was leading his group out after noticing how fast the water was rising. He warned them, clearly and urgently, to turn around. But they didn't listen. Confident and curious, they pushed forward, straight into danger. Soon after, Kathy Hoey, a graduate student researching aquatic life, passed through. She'd entered earlier that day, but turned back when the rising water reached her boots. On her way out, she warned another group at the entrance. They listened and left. But Aldrich, Bott, and Yoakum continued, ignoring yet another warning. Their confidence outweighed their caution. Aldrich had been caving before, but he lacked the skills for conditions like this. Bott and Yoakum had no experience at all. None of them understood how quickly a cave could change. As they went deeper, the rain outside worsened. The cave's dry corridors turned into flood channels. Rising water filled once passable paths. The quiet stream had become a violent, surging current. What started as an afternoon adventure was now turning into a trap.
By 8:15 p.m., concern turned into panic. The students hadn't returned. Friends and family raised the alarm, and soon authorities were called in. Indiana State Police reached out to 2 experienced cavers, Michael Moore and Jim Keith, to assess the cave. What they discovered was grim. At the entrance, only 18 inches of airspace remained. Water levels were still rising. Anyone inside was running out of time. Inside the cave, the rescue team began finding haunting signs of the trio's struggle. Muddy footprints showed their frantic attempt to climb to higher ground. Scratch marks along the walls revealed where they tried to hold on. A dying carbide lamp flickered weakly in the dark. And on a ledge, a half-eaten snack, a moment of rest before moving deeper into danger. By morning, rescuers returned as the waters finally began to recede. With great caution, they made their way inside. Less than 100 feet from the entrance, they made a heartbreaking discovery. Kim Aldrich and Marcia Bott had drowned. Both were found in the tight entrance passage where the rising floodwaters had left barely any airspace to breathe. But there was still hope for Terry Yoakum. Rescuers believed he might have made it to a higher chamber, known as Breakdown Mountain, about 500 feet in. It was a known refuge during cave floods, towering 30 feet high and often above water even in bad conditions. But that hope quickly faded. Terry's body was found not far from his friends. He hadn't made it to safety. It appeared the group had tried to push forward, but the rushing flood overtook them in one of the cave's tightest sections. In places, rescuers noted, only an inch of airspace remained. There was simply nowhere left to go. In the aftermath, a post-mortem analysis painted a sobering picture of what went wrong. A deadly mix of poor planning, inexperience, and critical mistakes had sealed their fate. The trio lacked the proper equipment and training needed for navigating a cave during such hazardous conditions. Worse yet, they had dismissed clear warnings from multiple experienced cavers, including one who had turned back just hours earlier after sensing the danger. And when the water began to rise, fear likely took over. Instead of seeking higher ground deeper in the cave, where they might have had a fighting chance, they tried to escape the way they had come. But the entrance passage was already a death trap, narrowed by the flooding waters and offering almost no airspace. That single decision, driven by panic, cost them their lives.
Devil's Eye Spring lies deep in the Florida wilderness, a famous spot for cave divers drawn by its mystery and danger. On April 26, 2015, 68-year-old Robert Urich and his partner, Evelyn Dudes, both skilled divers from Pennsylvania, arrived with a straightforward plan: explore the cave system using their diver propulsion vehicles. A DPV is an underwater scooter that pulls divers through the water, saving energy and allowing them to travel farther. It's invaluable for cave diving, but risky in silty zones, where the propeller can stir up sediment and destroy visibility. Their goal was to cover roughly 3,000 feet to reach an area called Mainland, a key point within the system. They had dived here many times before, but this trip would be different. The plan was to push their DPVs through a tight, silty section at the start of Mainland, continue into an area known as Sweet Surprise, and finally loop back into the main passage leading to the exit. With the DPV speeding their progress, the dive initially seemed manageable. But as Jurich and Evelyn ventured deeper into Devil's Eye Spring, the environment began to turn against them. The mainland passage grew tighter, the walls pressing in as if the cave itself wanted to swallow them whole. Visibility, dim under the glow of their dive lights, worsened rapidly. Jurich's DPV, once a helpful tool, became a liability in the silty passage. Its propeller churned up clouds of sediment, erasing what little they could see. Jurich pressed on, his DPV buzzing through the dark water. But each movement only thickened the swirling haze until the guideline, their lifeline to safety, vanished from sight. Disoriented and trapped in an underwater fog, his breathing quickened. The once familiar route had become a silent, suffocating labyrinth. Behind him, Evelyn fought to stay calm. Her diving light barely cut through the murky water, and soon Jurich vanished from sight. The narrowing walls amplified her isolation as she cautiously pressed forward, her confidence slipping with every kick. Desperate to stay close, she slowed down, scanning the haze for any trace of him. When she finally caught a glimpse, she saw his growing disorientation. Jurich no longer knew which way was forward or back. He kept searching for the guideline, their only link to safety, but his DPV was making things worse, its propeller churning the silt into a blinding cloud. The worsening visibility made it impossible to track each other's movements. Within moments, the two divers were separated completely, their communication lost in the silent chaos. The once clear water had transformed into an impenetrable, suffocating fog. Evelyn, realizing she was alone and unable to find Jurich, made the critical decision to retreat. She abandoned her DPV, knowing it was only stirring up more silt and draining her air supply. Moving cautiously, she located the guideline and followed it back toward the main passage.
Reaching the larger tunnel brought brief relief, but her heart raced as she glanced back into the darkness, knowing Urich was still lost somewhere inside. She waited, hoping to see his light emerge, but nothing came. With her air running low, she made the agonizing choice to surface for help. Once on the surface, Evelyn was frantic. She immediately reported the situation, and authorities quickly mobilized a recovery team. Deep below, Urich remained trapped in the chaos of the cave, unaware of how critical his situation had become. Several hours later, a recovery team led by Lamar Hires entered the cave. They carefully followed the guideline, retracing Urich and Evelyn's route while navigating the heavily silted passages. The deeper they went, the clearer the gravity of Urich's situation became. At around 400 feet from the entrance, they found him lifeless, suspended in the murky water. His DPV was partially buried in silt, suggesting he had abandoned it to navigate without the added burden. But without the DPV, visibility remained nearly zero, making it almost impossible for him to locate the guideline in the chaos. When the team freed the DPV, they discovered it was still fully functional, but it no longer mattered. Investigators later determined several critical missteps had contributed to the tragedy. One key factor was their choice to dive with side-mounted 85 cubic foot tanks, a setup adequate for short dives, but dangerously limiting under the extreme conditions they faced. However, without extra gas reserves, they were unprepared for the complications that arose. The smaller tanks, suitable for a short dive, drained quickly as the dive stretched longer than planned.
But the critical mistake was their decision to push their DPVs into the silty sections of the cave. As seasoned divers, they should have anticipated the risk. The DPVs, meant to conserve energy, instead worsened the situation by stirring up heavy silt. Visibility dropped to nothing, and even the guideline, their lifeline, vanished in the murk. Better preparation could have changed everything. Carrying stage tanks, choosing a safer route, or installing jump reels might have prevented disaster. If Urich had kept his DPV and stayed on the guideline, he might have found his way out. But in the darkness of Devil's Eye Spring, one small misstep became fatal. By the time the recovery team surfaced, the cave had claimed another victim. Urich's body was brought out, a grim reminder of the unforgiving nature of underwater caves. For Evelyn, the loss of her dive partner was devastating. Though she had followed proper procedures and escaped safely, the tragedy would haunt her forever, a lasting reminder of how thin the line is between adventure and survival.
The second story highlights just how dangerous cave diving can be, even for seasoned professionals. March 31, 2012. Weeki Wachee Springs, Florida, famous for its crystal waters and sprawling underwater caves, was the destination for 29-year-old Marcin Kay, a seasoned cave diver with years of experience in this breathtaking but deadly environment. That day, he joined the Karst Underwater Research Team, a group dedicated to exploring and mapping the complex cave systems. Their plan was straightforward: controlled dives to chart passages and improve diver safety in these hazardous waters. For Marcin, it was his final dive of the day. Confident and methodical, he carefully checked his tanks, equipment, and guideline before disappearing into the underwater maze, certain he was ready for whatever the cave might hold. The dive unfolded without issues at first. Marcin and his team stayed close to the guideline, their lifeline in the maze of twisting passages. Their beams lit up the cavern walls as they carefully documented the cave's features, moving with steady precision. At depths beyond 100 feet, danger was constant. Every diver knew a single mistake could be fatal. Maintaining a calm pace was critical to prevent nitrogen buildup, the invisible threat that could cause decompression sickness. Marcin understood this risk well and kept his movements controlled. By the time the team wrapped up and began their ascent, Marcin appeared calm and focused. He followed the line carefully, navigating the narrow tunnels with practiced ease. But around 4:30 p.m., everything shifted. As they neared the cave's exit, Marcin suddenly broke away from the guideline. Without warning, he darted upward into a tight crevice, a space so narrow even side-mount divers would struggle. His movements were quick and erratic, a sharp contrast to his usual controlled precision. The team reacted immediately. They flashed their lights, the universal underwater command to stop. When that failed, they reached out, trying touch signals to redirect him. But Marcin's reactions were scattered and panicked, slipping further from reason with each second.
He forced himself deeper into the constricted passage, twisting his body in desperation. Panic swept through the team as the realization hit: Marcin wasn't in control. What they couldn't yet know was that he was experiencing a cerebral arterial gas embolism, a life-threatening condition that can strike without warning. This condition, triggered by rapid ascent and expanding gas in the bloodstream, cuts off blood flow to the brain. Within seconds, it can cause confusion, disorientation, even blindness or paralysis. Marcin's sudden break from the line and irrational move into the crevice were clear signs of his fading mental state. He was no longer thinking logically, his movements turned frantic, and communication attempts failed as the embolism took control. Safety divers nearby, armed with extra gas, could only watch as he forced himself deeper into the constriction. Minutes dragged on. Despite every effort, Marcin's regulator was out and he showed no signs of consciousness. The team knew the situation had turned critical, but the tight confines made any direct rescue nearly impossible. The team quickly alerted the surface rescue crew, but underwater responses are never fast. Divers must move cautiously to avoid risking their own safety. By the time a rescue diver reached Marcin, the outcome was already decided. He was motionless, his tank still half full, his gear fully functional. The embolism had struck without mercy, leaving him unconscious and trapped until he drowned in the narrow crevice. His body was recovered just before 5 p.m. When the team surfaced, the weight of the loss was written on their faces. They had followed protocol and acted swiftly, yet the sudden onset of the embolism left them powerless, claiming Marcin's life in minutes.
In their statement after the incident, the KUR team stressed that embolisms are unpredictable and can overwhelm even the most prepared divers. They clarified that Marston's sudden move into the crevice was not a conscious decision, but the direct result of his medical emergency. His final dive served as a grim reminder of the balance divers face in underwater caves, a world of extraordinary beauty that can turn perilous without warning.
June 2nd, 2004. 9 teenagers stood at the entrance of Tongue River Cave in Wyoming, ready for an afternoon of adventure. 16-year-olds Barry Blaha and Dana Herbert had convinced their friends to explore the underground cave system. None had real caving experience, but they believed they could handle whatever lay ahead. They carried a mix of cheap flashlights, spare batteries, and a few borrowed headlamps, assuming it would be enough to light their way. There were no helmets, no proper caving gear, and no idea how dangerous things could get if anything went wrong. Entering in single file, they followed the winding passage into the mountain's depths, laughing and chatting as they went. At first, the main tunnel was wide, allowing them to stand upright and move comfortably, with plenty of space for everyone to spread out and explore different parts of the cavern. As they moved deeper into the cave, the teenagers found several side passages branching off from the main tunnel. Some led to dead ends, forcing them to backtrack and explore others. Along the way, the walls showed clear signs of water damage, loose rocks, and unstable sections, warnings any experienced caver would notice. But the teenagers were too caught up in the thrill to see the danger. Then Barry spotted something the others had missed, a narrow crack hidden in the shadows, seemingly leading deeper into the system. It wasn't on any map. To Barry, this felt like their discovery, something that could make them legends among their friends. Fueled by the rush of youth and the intoxicating thrill of discovery, Barry and Dana pushed deeper into the narrowing passage. While their friends wandered elsewhere in the cave system, the two of them were determined to claim this hidden tunnel as their own secret find. At first, it was manageable. They shuffled sideways through tight sections, their shoulders scraping against cold rock walls. Then came spots where they had to drop to their knees and crawl forward, their palms pressing into damp, gritty stone. Eventually, even that wasn't enough. The ceiling dropped so low they had to flatten themselves and army crawl on their bellies, inching forward in suffocating darkness.
Their flashlight beams cut narrow cones through the void, revealing more tunnels stretching endlessly ahead. But the deeper they went, the tighter it became. The narrowest section loomed, a slot-like opening barely 45 centimeters or 18 inches wide, and just 60 centimeters or 24 inches high. A brutal squeeze that would intimidate even veteran spelunkers with proper training and equipment. Barry, smaller and more eager, went first. Dana followed close behind, forcing herself through the suffocating space. The rock pressed against their ribs and shoulders, every breath stolen by stone. To move forward at all, they had to exhale completely, letting the air leave their lungs before wriggling through the rock's unyielding grip. Barry reached a point where the passage became impossibly tight. The walls closed in so much that he couldn't squeeze through, no matter how he turned his body. The logical move was simple: back out and explore another route. But Barry's teenage impatience took over. Determined to push forward, he decided to clear the blockage by moving smaller rocks out of his way. He freed one arm in the cramped space and grabbed a rock about the size of a softball, thinking it was part of the obstruction. Without considering the consequences or how caves behave, he used the rock as a hammer, striking the larger stones ahead to break them apart or knock them loose. Growing more desperate with each attempt, every impact sent deep vibrations through the surrounding stone. Dust began raining down from the ceiling above. The cave had stood untouched for thousands of years, but it had never faced an assault like this. The fractured rock formation was balanced on a fragile equilibrium. Every strike from Barry's improvised hammer disturbed that balance, sending stress waves through the unstable ceiling above. Then came every spelunker's worst nightmare. A deep, thunderous crack ripped through the passage, followed by the grinding roar of shifting stone.
A massive boulder, later estimated at over 300 pounds or 136 kilograms, broke free from the ceiling and crashed down directly behind Dana. The impact was brutal. The entire passage shook violently as a choking cloud of dust and debris swallowed the air. When the echoes finally died and the dust began to clear, the horrifying reality set in. The fallen boulder had completely sealed the passage behind them. Barry and Dana were trapped in a space barely larger than a coffin.
The claustrophobic nightmare that unfolded was beyond anything human endurance was meant to handle. Barry was wedged against the narrowest part of the passage, his chest compressed so tightly that every breath felt like dragging air through a straw. Each inhale burned, each exhale was a fight. Behind him, Danny was crammed between his feet and the massive boulder that had become their prison wall. Her breaths came in rapid, shallow gasps as panic clawed its way through her composure. To conserve battery, they eventually switched off their flashlights, and the darkness that swallowed them was absolute. It was the kind of darkness that felt alive, pressing against their skin and suffocating their senses. The silence was shattered only by their ragged breathing and the faint, muffled shouts of their friends somewhere beyond the boulder. But those voices felt miles away. They were buried alive, entombed beneath tons of rock that could shift and crush them without warning. Outside, their friends threw themselves at the boulder with frantic determination, but it didn't matter. The rock might as well have been a solid extension of the mountain itself. Their attempts to dick around it were just as futile. Each scrape of metal on stone only served to highlight how utterly impossible the situation had become. Every frustrated grunt, every shouted command, every hollow clang of tools on rock bled into the darkness where Barry and Dana lay trapped, amplifying the psychological torture. They weren't just stuck, they were sealed away from the world. Minutes dragged like hours, solid stone crushed into their bodies, cutting circulation and causing unbearable pain. The air in their cramped prison grew hot and stale with every breath, yet each inhale felt lacking. Muscle cramps from forced stillness made it worse, but the mental toll outweighed the pain. Thousands of tons of rock loomed above. Every faint sound became a threat, the shifting stones, dripping water, unseen creatures moving in the dark. Time dissolved into nothingness. A chilling thought crept in. They might die here, their bodies lost forever. Their friends made a desperate choice, to race back through the cave for help. Several reached the surface and called emergency services. The alert went out to Sheridan County rescue teams who began preparing specialized gear for an operation they knew would test every limit. The rescue was a fight against time and physics. Rescuers arrived with winches, hydraulic jacks, and specialized cave tools, but moving a 300-pound boulder in a cramped passage was nearly impossible.
Only 1 or 2 people could reach the work area at a time, forcing rescuers to work in shifts. Every tool had to be carried deep into the cave by hand. Each move came with the fear of triggering another rockfall that could make things worse. The unstable rock demanded extreme caution. Hours slipped by as the operation turned into a race against death. The longer Barry and Dana stayed trapped, the higher the risk of severe complications from compression and restricted breathing. Hypothermia added to the danger, as the cave's constant chill could quickly drop their body temperatures to lethal levels. At last, after what felt like endless hours, rescuers managed to position the winch system. Every movement had to be flawlessly synchronized, as even the slightest mistake could destabilize the fragile rocks around them. Inch by inch, with painstaking precision, the 300-pound boulder was dragged away from the passage. When Barry and Dana were finally free, the moment was overwhelming, a mix of pure relief and excruciating pain. After being trapped for so long, their muscles had locked up, refusing to cooperate. Rescuers carefully guided them out, each motion deliberate as if pulling them back to life itself. The trek back through the winding cave passages felt surreal, every step carrying them further from the nightmare that had nearly claimed their lives. At around 10:30 p.m., almost 8 hours after their simple afternoon adventure began, Barry and Dana emerged from Tongue River Cave, exhausted, shaken, but alive.
In this next story, when a cave owner tries to mess with nature, everyone else inside are forced to pay the price.
May 5th, 1997. The morning sun barely touched the rocky mouth of Arnold Hollow Cave as 4 explorers prepared for what seemed like just another adventure. At exactly 9 a.m., Dell Lancaster, her sister Diane, family friend Phyllis Nelson, and cave owner John Nelson stepped into the cool darkness, their headlamps slicing through the shadows. For John, this was no ordinary trip. For weeks, he had been planning this day. Deep inside his cave, about 400 yards from the entrance, lay a stubborn crawlway, a tight squeeze that had always blocked his progress. He was convinced that beyond that narrow slot waited a stunning formation room, untouched by human eyes.
Today, he believed, was the day they would finally break through and claim the discovery. The group moved with confidence through the familiar passages. Dell, just 36, was an experienced caver who had spent years underground. Her older sister Diane, 40, shared the same passion for exploration. Phyllis, though 64, carried herself with the steady assurance of someone who had decades of experience beneath the earth. John Nelson, both their guide and the cave's owner, led them onward with excitement. Eventually, they reached the stubborn passage. The tunnel narrowed until it was little more than a crawl space, just enough for a single body to squeeze through. Dell went first, inching her way into the rock throat. Diane followed, then Phyllis. Each woman pressed and twisted, forcing themselves past the constriction. John stood at the entrance, studying the opening. He had pushed through this crawl before, but it was always a struggle. Broad-shouldered and described by friends as a robust fellow, the space had never been forgiving. But today, he had a different plan. Instead of forcing his way through again, he decided to make the passage larger. Not just for himself, but for everyone. At least, that was the logic at the time. He pulled out his tools and began chipping at the rock, striking at loose slabs of breakdown. Piece by piece, stone fell away, and with each strike, the passage seemed to inch closer to opening. But the cave was fragile, balanced for thousands of years. His hammering rattled more than he realized. Then, disaster struck.
A deep rumble rolled through the passage, followed by a thunderous crash of stone. In an instant, the crawl collapsed, boulders and debris slamming down until the opening was completely sealed. On the other side, Dell, Diane, and Phyllis were stunned. One moment, they were waiting in a larger room. The next, they were trapped in darkness with no way back. Their only path to freedom had just been buried under tons of unforgiving rock. John froze in horror. The reality hit him like a blow. His decision had trapped 3 people underground. The weight of responsibility pressed on him harder than the rockfall itself. Panicked, he clawed at the collapse, dragging away smaller stones with his bare hands. Sweat poured down his face as he strained against rocks far too heavy for any man to move alone. For over an hour, he fought desperately, but the wall of debris did not budge. Finally, he realized the truth. He couldn't do this by himself. With dread, John turned back. Every step out of the cave felt like abandonment, but he knew it was their only chance. Bursting into the daylight, he called for help. Emergency services were alerted, and soon, cave rescue experts were mobilizing from across the region. By that afternoon, Arnold Hollow Cave was surrounded by rescuers, gear, and worried families waiting for word. The first task was assessment. Experienced explorers studied the collapse. What they found was both promising and terrifying. There was a tiny gap, small enough to allow air and communication with the trapped women, but the rock was unstable. Any careless attempt to dig could trigger another collapse, one that might kill the women instantly or bury them forever. Meanwhile, Dell, Diane, and Phyllis faced their nightmare. The space they were stuck in was barely large enough for 3 adults. They had to remain pressed together, shifting constantly just to keep their legs from going numb. There was no room to lay down, no chance to rest properly. Though they had enough air and no major injuries, the claustrophobia was suffocating. Minutes stretched into hours, each one heavier than the last. Rescuers made a critical decision. The collapse would not be touched until proper support was in place. Shoring timbers would be cut and positioned to stabilize the passage before any rocks were moved. Through the narrow opening, rescuers passed supplies, food, water, warm clothing, and even a small camp stove to fend off the cave's bitter chill. These lifelines kept the women strong and prevented hypothermia as they endured the long wait. As news of the entrapment spread, unexpected help arrived. Workers from a nearby silica mine volunteered their expertise. They knew rock and they knew how to work with heavy tools in dangerous conditions. They joined the rescue effort, helping cut and install timbers that would hold the cave in place during the delicate excavation. Above ground, the scene was tense. Families stood anxiously, clinging to hope while fearing the worst. Underground, the rescuers inched forward with painstaking care. Every timber placed, every rock shifted, was a battle against gravity and time.
Inside the collapse chamber, the women tried to stay calm. Outwardly, they spoke in measured tones and encouraged each other. Inwardly, fear never left. Dell silently wondered if she would ever see daylight again. Diane admitted later that she was terrified but kept her fear hidden to avoid panicking the others. Even Phyllis, with all her years of experience, later confessed this was the most frightening ordeal of her life. Finally, as evening fell, the rescue reached its climax. With the passage stabilized, rescuers began carefully removing the blocked rock. Each stone was shifted slowly, with constant checks to ensure nothing shifted dangerously. Hours of tense labor passed. Then, at 8:30 p.m., more than 11 hours after the collapse, light broke through. The passage was open. Cheers erupted from the rescuers, and above ground, families wept with relief. Dell, Diane, and Phyllis were guided back through the crawl, emerging at last into the cool night air. Remarkably, they were in good condition. Though stiff, cramped, and exhausted, they had survived without injury. The supplies, the steady presence of each other, and the tireless work of the rescue team had carried them through. In the aftermath, experts analyzed what had happened. The conclusion was blunt. The collapse had been caused by John's attempt to enlarge the passage. A well-intentioned act had nearly ended in tragedy. The lesson was clear. Never alter a cave's natural formations while others are inside. The risks are simply too great.